Hi, everybody,
Great.
and thank you for joining us today. So I have the pleasure of being joined by Tippett, who is an architecture consultant working for Computer Centre, and she can explain to us what an architecture consultant means specifically. So without too much of an intro, Dee, I'd like you to just explain to us really what it is that you do for a living and how you got to be in this position to start with.
So today, I'm hopefully getting towards the end of my career, so I'm trying to slow down a little bit. And I actually tried to retire from Computer Centre a few years ago, and was enticed to stay on to help set up an architecture function within the Group IS organisation, partly because that's my background. So going back to my recent roots to try and help set up the function, um, I fill in on some architecture roles in some programs when either my specific experience is relevant or there isn't anybody else to do it. So we're quite a small team still. So my background, my degree is computer science. I started as an analyst programmer, and I really thought I would stay writing code for my whole career because I loved it. Um, and circumstances led me to leave Marks and Spencer, where I was a senior analyst programmer, then systems designer, which was the pretty standard career path. Um, and I wanted to do something different. I was a bit bored, to be honest. And I got an opportunity to go to work for a software company in a pre-sales role. And the reason I went to that was I was a bit fed up really with having software presented to me by vendors that didn't really do what was right for our business. And going to work for a vendor and understanding what motivated them to develop their software the way they did was really quite interesting. And it enabled me to think about some slightly different things when purchasing software. Um, and I kind of followed that what can I learn route in changing jobs throughout my career. I'm not someone who has planned it out and thought I'll spend 2 years doing this and then 2 years doing that. I have some friends who've done that and I admire them greatly for that structure. But I've kind of jumped ship when an interesting um, new one passes by and I think, oh, that looks like an interesting destination. Um, on the other hand, I have left some jobs largely because of the people that I was working for. And in retrospect, maybe that wasn't the right thing to do. I should have been more challenging. But that's something we can explore separately as well if you want to.
Yeah, no, thank you. So you've mentioned a few different role types in there. Um, the fact that you're building an architecture function, um, I suspect that most people watching this won't really have a concept of what types of roles would they then sit inside an architecture function. So is it just a whole bunch of architects, or are there different job titles that might exist in that kind of ecosystem?
So it varies from company to company, to be honest. Other companies that I've worked for, the architecture team consisted of enterprise architects, solution architects, system technical architects, sorry, and designers. So they specialize in different things, different aspects of architecture and design. Um, and it really tends to flex to suit the organization and how the IS division within a particular company is set up. So within Computer Centre, we've got solution architects who cover both the enterprise perspective and looking at roadmaps and things, and particular pieces of work and the architecture for the solution for a particular piece of work. That could be application integration and technology as well. Computer Centre is going through quite a transition in both its business applications and its infrastructure, a major move to the cloud at the moment. So there's a lot of change going on. But design is not within the function, that sits with the delivery function. It depends very much on the organisation structure.
And you mentioned that there's lots of different types of architects. It's one of the things as a recruiter that's always confused me is what's the difference between a solution architect and a technical architect, for example. But there's also data architects, infrastructure architects, software architects. So what glues all these people together? What actually is the job of an architect, and how can you then become one from lots of different starting points?
I think you hit the nail on the head with the word glue. It's about making sure that everything joins up within the context of a piece of work or within the context of the enterprise. It's actually very similar. How do the systems and infrastructure that business has support what that business does? So there's some things that you need to understand as an architect about the organization, how it's structured, the business that it operates in, which can be quite varied. There is always some commonality. Everybody does finance, everybody does HR. But then operationally, there are some fairly significant differences between what a retailer does and what a managed services company does. And then how you create the infrastructure that supports that, whether it's a data center that you've got yourself, whether it's got cloud elements, whether it's got someone else's cloud elements. And vendors are marvelous. They all use the same terminology but mean different things by it. So unraveling all that and understanding and explaining internally what that means to the organization that you work in is very much the role of the architect. And understanding how systems join together to support end-to-end business processes. Our world is very complex today. It's like a big pile of spaghetti. And in some ways, we've contributed to that in the past. We've just bolted a bit on and added another bit because it's expedient to do so. When we want to try and replace something that's fundamental to the business operation, it can be very hard if you don't understand how all those bits hang together.
Yeah. So there's two key parts you mentioned there. The one is the understanding the business, and that's what we say about a lot of, especially senior IT roles. You know, it is actually is understanding the business and the customer, and then being able to communicate with the technical people. But I have this perception that architecture and architects having to themselves be fairly technical or heavily technical. Am I wrong in that sense, or do you believe that, you know, just to do an architecture role, you have to have real strong domain knowledge?
It depends on the specific role. So what I'd say is that communication skill is extremely important for an architect. So you need to be able to understand the technical aspects of something, but to explain them in non-technical terms, because often you'll be talking to very senior people within the organization trying to explain why it's difficult to do something, or why it will take longer than they think. It looks very simple on the outside, but actually, because of something that you've done historically, or because of something the vendor is doing, it's actually far more complicated and costly, and maybe not even the right answer for the organisation because of the circumstances it's in. And explaining that in layman's terms is pretty important part of the architect's role.
Yeah. And go on, Karen. Sorry.
There are different tiers of architecture, if you like. I wouldn't say one's at the top or one's at the bottom, but there are some very technical roles around the infrastructure, networking, and connectivity between different locations, for example. And if you're talking about business architecture, that's actually much more about the organization and how it works. And then all the layers in between around the applications that are being used to support the business, how they're integrated to each other, what data is passing between those applications. So that's where the roles of application architect, data architect, integration architect all come in as well. In a lot of smaller organizations, you have to be multi-skilled in more than maybe even two of those things, but you also need to be able to talk well and discuss with each other the implications of the infrastructure on the data and on the application locations, for example. One of the things we're discussing at length at the moment is data sovereignty and the implications for an organisation like Computer Centre, which is international. We've always run our applications in a data centre in the UK before. What are the implications now that we have customers who are in North America? They maybe don't want their data held in the UK, and what we're going to do about it.
Yeah, you've also got conflicting data privacy laws and things in Europe, UK, America. And
absolutely.
You mentioned the role of the business architect there. So I think some of the other architecture roles are quite transparent as to what the typical route would be. You know, if you're a software architect, you've probably come from an analyst programmer role like yourself. If you're an infrastructure architect, you've probably been a network engineer. What are the kind of roles that would lead you to becoming a business architect then?
Typically, business analyst route or program management. And I've seen a lot of business people move into that role as well. So coming from various routes within an organisation, non-technical routes, it's probably the least technical of the architecture roles.
Yeah, that makes sense. And do you think architecture is a role that you could start in your career, kind of set out and say, I'm going to be an architect? Or do you think it's something that evolves over time? So you decide that you want to work in software, or you want to work in data or infrastructure, and then it's an evolution of that first job, like it was for you. You loved what you did, but you still got pulled into this space.
Well, I'm just really nosy and get frustrated easily, I think. I think there are some that you can target. So those more technical ones, it is easy to target architecture as where you want to go. It's one of those slightly unusual roles that it isn't necessarily a management role. And technical people often find management an anathema. So it's an attractive career path. I think for the more business oriented roles, so the business architect and even application architecture at the enterprise level, it's much more difficult to target that as an end point in or a target for the career. That does tend to evolve because personally, I believe you need a lot of experience in order to fulfill those roles very well. And that takes time.
Yeah. And beyond what we've already spoken about in terms of, you know, those communication skills, which we speak at time and again in every single role we talk about, what type of people do you think naturally make good architects, or do you work with a whole diverse bunch of people?
I think it depends on the organisation that you work in. If you work in a technical organisation that, so say one of the vendors, you're working for IBM or Oracle or Salesforce, you tend to be much more focused. What I call client side organisations, which is a term I've kind of acquired from working on many sides of the table, as it were. In client organisations, you actually need to be a bit more schizophrenic and practical, frankly. And those two things can sometimes clash between vendors and clients, because the practicalities of working in an organisation that has a business to operate is slightly different to being an architect in a technical company that's basically producing products to sell.
Yeah, interesting. So probably the most positive use of the word schizophrenic that I've encountered. So a lot of the things you mentioned there, to me, don't necessarily rule out women from being in these roles. I think one of the barriers to a lot of technical roles is that pre-existing need for that technical understanding, to have come from a tech degree, to know how to code, to be able to go into a certain role. And we speak all the time about there's loads of roles where you don't need that lend themselves to people that haven't come through that route. But time and time again, I see every company struggling to try to find female architects. What do you see as the main reasons, be they real reasons or perceived reasons, that actually make architecture a place that doesn't attract and have many female workers in it?
I think there are two things. One's very real, and the pool to pull from is small, because STEM is not attractive to young people going into university, or girls going into university, rather. I was talking to an old friend of mine who's one of my alumni. She's VC at one of the universities in the UK now, and she said there are fewer women entering as undergraduates than there were when we were at university, and 10% of our class was female. And there needs to be more done to address that. Computer Centre does a lot of schools outreach. It does a lot of women in STEM stuff to try and change that. But it is a huge problem. And then women tend to only apply for jobs that they think they're a really good and high percentage fit to the job description. And in some ways, the job descriptions are often too specific. They say that they want technical skills. And I think when we're recruiting, we need to look and be honest about whether we really need technical skills, or whether we're actually looking for a more generic understanding of what technology means for the business. So with the architecture roles, hand in hand with architecture goes IT strategy. And that is something that you don't necessarily need to understand network concepts to understand how you can move forward. Women are really good at problem solving, and that's what architecture is.
Interesting. So you've already kind of partly answered my next question, which was, what do you think we collectively and as individuals can do to try to change that, to make it more of an attractive space for ladies to work in and to create more opportunities? So you mentioned obviously adjusting the specifications to make sure that we're not excluding people that haven't come from a specific path. There's probably elements of bias in there as well around what people perceive architects need to be able to do before they can give them a job. Are there any other things that you think we as individuals can take responsibility for and help move more people into that space?
I think COVID's actually helped quite a lot, because we're much more open to people working from home and working flexibly now, and that's something that we need to be a bit more pushy about, I think. It's just a fact of life that women take more responsibilities for the home and family life. And architecture roles can seem, because of their seniority, to require more dedication to the job. Because somebody is not working the standard 9 to 5, 5 days a week, doesn't mean that they're not dedicated to the job. We have a lot of females working within our organisation that might not work 9 to 5, but they might do 7 till 8:30 and then take a break to drop the kids at school and then come back again. And that isn't a problem. It could have been perceived as a problem when we were all used to working 9 to 5 in the office, or 8 till 6. It really isn't, and we need to treat people more flexibly. I think there's a confidence thing for a lot of women. I mentioned we only apply for jobs that we're a high percentage fit for. I think we all have responsibility to our employees to encourage them to apply for things when they wouldn't themselves.
Yeah, and you're obviously a mentor in the program, which is how we know each other. Are you finding that the mentees that approach you are wanting to get into architecture as a career path, or is it other skills that you've got that they tend to navigate you
I,
towards?
I've got two at the moment, and one of each. So
One
one is more focused on actually service delivery roles, but interested in how that can be shaped out and some of the challenges that I mentioned around family life and so on. And the other one is just starting off in her career, and she's really interested in exploring opportunities and looking for role models, to be honest. I think that's something that we can push further as well.
Yeah, interesting. Do you think that and I'm going to highlight Greg, who's on the call today and is a great advocate and male ally in the network. Do you think that being a role model is something that is exclusively the obligation of women to do, or do you think that the men in the industry can actually be inspiring role models to some of the girls coming through?
Absolutely. You don't have to be the same sex. I think it's about the skill set and the mindset, and that's not driven by your sex. I think there are some things that we tend to hold ourselves back as women because we're taught in a lot of ways not to be pushy. That's not good. And the words that would be used to describe certain behavior in men are not the same words that are used to describe women. They tend to be negative words for the same behavior. And we all do it. It's just the way we've been brought up. A man would be showing leadership, whereas a woman would be pushy. It's just not right. It's not even true. It's just the words we use. And there are expectations that we have of women that we don't have of men, and vice versa. And we can all do something to change that, men and women. I think if we can just think more generically about the skill set and the mindset, that will help everybody.
Yeah, no, good advice. Coming back now to your career specifically, I'm going to open the floor to any questions from the audience if anybody wanted to probe into any of those things you mentioned earlier. While I wait to see if any reaction from the audience, the one thing I wanted to question was the kind of you moving into a leadership role. So you said that you really enjoyed being a programmer and the hands-on coding element and all that kind of stuff. So two-part question. How and when did you decide that a leadership role was right for you? And did that mean then you had to stop doing the bits of the job that you enjoyed?
I was given a choice, basically. I could move into the senior systems designer role at M&S. It's going back a long way. Or I could stay doing the code cutting, but there was no other career path. So it would plateau out. I consciously felt that I would be de-skilling myself if I stopped cutting code. It was something that I really struggled to get my head around for a while, because I really enjoyed writing code and solving problems. What I came to realise was actually it's a different sort of problem solving at more senior levels within the organisation. And there were some things that I really didn't enjoy about it, problem solving the people issues, problem solving the budget issues, but they're all different uses of skills that I had developed. And I really enjoyed that. And I've used that much more widely than just looking at the career path and the role and moving into leadership, but also crossing different types of companies. So I've gone from retail end user organizations to software vendors to outsourcers to a very heavily B2B organization. I like learning new things. It's important to me when I change jobs that there's something different about it. But what I found is that things I've learned in one scenario in one organization can be applied really well in a different scenario.
And then final question for me, I guess, is what would if you were looking back at your earlier self and you had the chance to speak to yourself at the start of your career, what was the one piece of advice that you give yourself, or one thing you do differently?
So we touched on this briefly before. I have left I've had 10 jobs, which for somebody of my age is very unusual. People tend to stay a long time. I think it's becoming much more common with younger generations to have more frequent job changes. I've left a number of jobs because of the people that I was working for. More than once because it was very clear that they didn't want a woman in the role, and particularly more senior roles. And my reaction is, okay, I'll go and do something else then. It's never been a negative move for me, but today I find myself thinking, what about the next woman that came along there? I didn't make life any better for her. I could have. And that's my biggest regret. I should have fought a bit, I think.
Interesting. Interesting, because I think that's you putting other people first, to be honest. I would say if you're in an organization where you're not valued, that my advice would be get out of there, because there'll be places where they'll appreciate your skills much more, and you shouldn't suffer for the benefit of everybody else. But I think it's very good of you to think about it that way.
I think it's probably reflective of where I am in my career as well. And hindsight is a very clear thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time, Dee, so I really appreciate your time today. My big takeaway, you taught me a lot about what an architect actually is, what they do, and the types of people that can get into it. I think my perception is that you absolutely had to know the ins and outs of every bit of technology you're going to be putting into an organization have kind of been demystified there a little bit. So hopefully this will inspire more people, not just women, but more people to think about architecture as a career path, because there is a massive skill shortage that we see on a daily basis as recruiters. And yeah, thanks very much for your time, and really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dee.
Thank
Good
you.
to meet you. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Bye.